The problem is you do see a lot of antisocial people succeed. Loneliness is as big a risk factor for ill health and death.
We live inside our heads.
You go cold turkey, you go into withdrawal.
There is a lot of value in the stuff that we struggle with.
Better Thinking, conversations with experts exploring all things psychology. Welcome back to Better Thinking. My name is Nesh Nikolic, and today I have the privilege of speaking with Jae Jung, a professor in the School of Education and director of the Gifted Education Research, Resource and Information Centre at UNSW. Jae's research into gifted adolescents, especially around their education and career decisions, has been published or presented more than 100 times across top journals and conferences worldwide. He's also picked up numerous awards, including the 2023 Pathbreaker Award from the Australian Educational Research Association and multiple honours from the US Mensa Education and Research Foundation. Beyond that, he's leading the field through roles like editor of the Australasian Journal of Gifted Education and president of the Australian Association for the Education of the Gifted and Talented. In today's conversation, we dive into high ability individuals, how to identify them, what their unique needs are, the importance of curriculum differentiation, shifting unhelpful attitudes around gifted students, and where we should be heading in the future. I think you'll find it thought-provoking and hopefully a bit of a challenge to the way we often see high ability education. So let's jump straight in. Jae, a big thank you and a warm welcome to coming onto the show today. I'm enthused and excited and interested to hear more about your work, particularly with the importance of adolescence and how parents can go out and keep in mind their decision-making process and what we can consider. Being a parent myself and potentially about to go into, or not potentially, will be going into that space fairly soon. Excited to hear about your work and the research around that as well. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Nesh.
Let's first start with a little bit about how you got into researching this space.
Okay, so it wasn't planned by any means. My first degree was a Bachelor of Commerce with majors in accounting and finance, and I actually worked as a chartered accountant for 9 years before that accountancy was my first career. And then after 9 years, I thought I'd have a change of career, and I thought I would pursue a PhD. Academia was the plan. I thought I'd pursue something in economics because that was related to my undergraduate degree, and I thought I would support myself in the process by being a teacher while I was doing a PhD. So I did a DipEd, which was a 1-year degree at the time. And while I was doing the DipEd, I realized that there was a lot of research to do in the field of education. So I decided to change track. And for my PhD thesis topic, I thought I'd combine my two areas of economics and education. And to me, the logical overlap was decision-making. I thought in economics, there's a lot of decision-making, there's a lot of investigation, the decision-making of people, and same in education. So my PhD thesis was on the vocational decisions of adolescents. And in fact, my two supervisors, one supervisor was from the Faculty of Education and one supervisor was from the Faculty of Business to combine my two areas. So that's how it came about. I was lucky that after I finished my PhD in 2009, immediately afterwards, I got a job as a lecturer in the School of Education, and the job was in the field of gifted education. So that meant that I was able to combine my interest in vocational decision making with high ability students, and so that's my main research area. the vocational decisions, the career decisions, the career development of high ability individuals. And that's how that came about.
And what are the uh, big questions of the day? What I know there's in academia, there's forever questions to be asked, and at the end of every paper, there's so many more questions that need to be answered. But are there specific areas that you personally have an interest in that you want to that you're able to share with us?
So the big questions of the day. So in terms of my research, or
Yes.
in terms
Yeah,
of
in terms of
my
research.
research?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated by the sort of the issues that are considered, the sort of the processes that are involved when one goes about making the career decision. It's not something that different people approach this in different ways. Some people think about this from a very early age. So with high ability individuals, it happens at the end of primary school. Um, I know in most high schools we have career education in about year 9 or 10. I think that's far too late, because high ability individuals are thinking about their future careers at a very early age. So this thought, the processes involved in making a career decision, whether it's sort of everyone does it differently. The factors that are considered are different. So in Australia, the key factors are things like one's area of interest, the area that one's highly able in. Things like for high ability individuals, it's about getting intellectual stimulation, getting the sort of the intellectual satisfaction. Also, this differs by cultural groups as well. So in Western societies, it's often a very individual decision. In Eastern societies and non-Eastern societies, it's also a family decision. It's also you're highly influenced by your parents. You're highly influenced by societal expectations. Having said that, highly able individuals generally have a lot of expectations that they are facing, not only from themselves. They have high expectations of themselves and from their family and of society in general. There's an expectation that high ability individuals go into a certain type of career, a certain type, a professional career, a high-paying career. This sort of thing. There's multiple issues that many students are grappling with, and it's not an easy decision. And I can go on about the career decisions of prodigies, so those high ability individuals who are exceptionally able from a very young age, and you have substantial investment by the family on the student's education, and then the student wanting to change this sort of these sorts of issues. It's a very complicated decision, and also in this day and age, we're at a point where people change their careers all the time as well. This is also something.
You mentioned that currently in Australia, there's a general introduction to considering careers around year 9, year 10. We tend to have work experience at those times, so that
Yes.
we're thinking about what a career might look like. You also mentioned that might be a little bit late in your point of view. Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
Yes. So little kids, they start thinking about careers from a very young age. But these tend not to be very serious career aspirations. They tend to be like a lot of kids, they change their minds every week or so. This sort of happens with everyone. But with high ability individuals, this happens at a much earlier age than the rest of the student population. So the research suggests it happens at around year 5, year 6. These students are first seriously starting to think about their future careers at that early stage. And a lot of teachers, a lot of adults say, okay, that's too early to think about careers. Let's just focus on academics. Let's just focus on English and maths, literacy, numeracy, etc. And obviously, it's important for teachers to teach these things, but we also need to acknowledge that highly able individuals start thinking about these things from a very early age. And while we should not be narrowing, while we shouldn't be sort of introducing things like career work experience at that early stage, it's important to acknowledge this, and it's important to nurture these interests. It's important to sort of help students explore a wide range of career options as well, multiple different career options from an early age. Yeah.
It seems to me that just from a logical perspective, and obviously research is always important to be applied because our hypotheses aren't always met, but it seems to me like nurturing someone's interest and providing resources around that is unbelievably important for engagement, for interest, for obviously intellect, and obviously starting to think about what it might look like, knowing that there's an infinite number of opportunities for someone to go out and segue from that to a completely different path, kind of like yourself, right? You started in accounting, economics, etc., and pivoted. Another interest came about in many different ways, and can still occur. You and I could probably change our careers if we wished.
Yes, we could.
But there is something stable about careers generally. We might swap quite early in life, and there's fewer people, I'm assuming, that swap later in life. But if we find something that a child likes, why not nurture it? Why not really go out and say, sure, in a similar way that if someone's doing well in mathematics and they like to be pushed, they like to be challenged, why wouldn't we give them the extension of that?
Yeah.
The child's kind of yearning for it.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because one of my research studies was the career decisions of Australian representatives at the International Mathematics Olympiad. So I interviewed 15 or 16 Australian representatives at the Australian Mathematics Olympiad. They all got a medal or they got a gold, silver, or bronze, or a highly commended recommendation. And I interviewed them about their experiences through schooling, how they got to the Olympiad, and then what they're doing afterwards. And most of the participants said that what they were learning at school in maths was quite boring. And because it was just too easy for them. They had mastered this from a very early age, and because their teachers recognized their abilities, they connected them to the Australian Mathematics Trust from a very early age, from about year 7. And they've got these holiday programs and week-to-week online programs that was successful in re-engaging these students in mathematics. So school and maths, they were bored with it. They were sort of they were losing interest in maths, but because they were able to get these mathematical opportunities, these advanced mathematical opportunities from a very early age, and they were working with other highly able mathematicians from an early age, that they retained their interest in maths. They were selected in the Australian team. They made it to a couple of international mathematics Olympiads, and it's also interesting what they ended up doing afterwards. So a lot of them ended up in academia in maths. A lot of them ended up in finance, software, all mathematics related careers. That was possible only because they were able to, their interests in maths was nurtured from an early age.
It makes sense not only from an intellect point of view, but also from a social point of view, that you're then allowing these kids to find, if I can, use air quotes, their people, other high
Yes.
ability individuals? Because I assume, not being one of them, but I assume high ability individuals uh, have something about them that is attractive to other high ability
Yes.
individuals.
Yes.
They can kind of understand each other at a different way. There's an interest, there's an intellect, there's something really socially desirable to be around someone like yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
So,
it makes sense to have that trust, that mathematics trust for, if we're talking about that as an example.
yeah. So it's a lot of the participants said that they didn't find their people at school. So a lot of them were sort of, and this happens with a lot of, I'll also use the word gifted students, a lot of gifted students. They're often sort of, they don't find their tribe at school, or they're gravitating toward older kids. And so they were able to, these participants, these former Olympians, they were able to find their social group. Um, um, with all these other participants, all these other students from across Australia who are participating in the program. Yeah.
Is there an argument to be potentially said, and I'm kind of pushing forward fairly quickly, but is there an argument to be said that uh, mainstream schools would struggle to provide that space for these very
For
specific, high ability individuals, and that there should be some consideration, or at least the research, maybe pointing in a direction of engaging these particular kids with, to be with their tribe, so to speak, and to be intellectually challenged differently because they are more capable.
yes, so I'm not sure. Are you based in Sydney or
Canberra.
Melbourne? You're based in Canberra. Okay. So that explains your question. This is a perennial issue. This is a big issue in New South Wales, and it should be across Australia. So my answer to your question is, of course, many gifted students feel social isolation from the non-gifted students. Many gifted students face a lot of socio-emotional issues. Research suggests that gifted students, 60% of gifted students are bullied at some point in their schooling. So here is the argument that we need to offer selective schools. We need to offer schools for gifted students, or other environments for gifted students, so that they can meet their tribe, so that they can they have socio-emotional well-being, and that they can reach their potential, because one's socio-emotional well-being has flow-on effects to one's academic achievement and all other aspects of the life of the student. So in New South Wales, we've got about 50 gifted schools in the public sector.
I had no
Yeah. We've got 50 in New South Wales, and you'll often find me making comments to the press about the need for this, the importance of this option, because there are segments of the community who are against this. They feel that it's elitist. It's giving highly able students, gifted students, a privilege that is not available to other students, etc. So yes, and I know in the other states, in Victoria, they've only got 4 gifted schools. In Queensland, 3, Adelaide, 3, etc. So the numbers of gifted schools in the other states is not as, you don't have as many. And I remember going down to Canberra about 5 or 6 years ago. I was speaking to the head of the education unit in the ACT. I'm not sure, I don't precisely remember the name of the unit, but I do remember making the recommendation that a city of the size of Canberra needs to have at least one gifted school, because, for example, in Newcastle, I think Newcastle is about the same size as Canberra. Newcastle has a gifted school, Meriwether High. Um, so I remember recommending that a gifted school be set up. It's obviously not happened, but this option is absolutely necessary for highly able students, for gifted students to meet their tribe, to find like-minded students, to form meaningful friendships. And because this has flow-on effects to academic achievement, this has flow-on effects for a lot of things. And by the way, like that's not the only way to support highly able students. So we've got you've obviously heard of acceleration grade skipping. That's another option, grade skipping, skipping grades, for example. And we can do it by subject. It can be subject for one subject only or a couple of subjects. And then in the mainstream schools, we've got what's called curriculum differentiation, where the teacher is expected to differentiate the teaching to different students. Now, this is a lot more widely accepted by the general community, but the challenge here is that in a typical mixed ability classroom, you have a very wide range of ability.
Yeah.
And some estimates are, I've seen some research studies suggest that there's about a 6-year range of ability in the typical mixed ability classroom. So let's say we've got a year 7 mixed ability classroom. We're dealing with students working at about the year 3 level and also students working at about the year 10 level. So that's a very wide range of ability that a single teacher is expected to cater to. And that's very hard. And that's why we need things like gifted schools, and some schools will have gifted classes just for gifted students, etc.
And to be fair, and you say very eloquently and politically correct, I won't. It's absolutely impossible. It's impossible, and nor should teachers be expected to be able to do it at that level because of the impossibility.
Yes.
It's a great idea, wonderful, but how it lands, how it hits the ground, and how do we go out and achieve that? Is just not going to happen. And I imagine as well, and I'm only taking a guess here, but I imagine the student who's doing exceptionally well is potentially not going to be able to get the attention because of several reasons. One, there might be more important, pressing things happening in the classroom. But number two, we're now asking a teacher who's not supposed to be teaching that curriculum to go out and find that curriculum and match it correctly.
Yes.
And
Differentiate it.
There's a lot that goes into doing it at any level, but that stretch of six years is I'd say impossible. Can you go through? You touched on it, but can you go through a little bit of the, what's the objections to these gifted schools?
And
the reason why I ask is, for me, I'm not too concerned about what gifted means per se. It's no different to saying if a child likes to play basketball, we do this, you're in division A, B, C, D, and eventually you get to, the national team. You kind of split it up, and that would be no different to if someone is incredibly gifted at art, we give them, we put them into art school, so to speak, right? Because they're with their tribe, they're with their people. And I'm not an artist by any stretch of the imagination, but I can see one, from afar, the way they think, the creative one, the way they talk, their formulation of life, and very philosophical or kind of vague. It doesn't always resonate for everybody else, but once they're connected with their people, my goodness, what an environment. So what's the objective?
Why is this?
These gifted schools, and particularly I'm surprised by 50 being available in New South Wales. That's amazing.
We got 50. So like you gave the example of art. Let's extend that to sport.
Sure.
Okay, so students who are gifted in sport. We have the Australian Institute of Sport. So the top sports students, the top athletes in Australia, they get scholarships to go to the Australian Institute of Sport, and they get intensive training, they get intensive nurturing. Um, but it's quite ironic that this isn't object. There's no objection to this. There's no objection to giftedness in sport, nurturing and supporting this, and yet there is so much opposition to giftedness in the academic and the intellectual domain. And basically, the reason is Australia is an egalitarian society. We have things like the tall poppy syndrome. So it's an irony between the different domains, but in Australia, we like to sort of give everyone the idea of equality is everyone gets the same thing. Now, and also, right, there's often a focus on students at the other end. So students who are struggling, students who have some sort of disability, and of course they need support. But equally, gifted students need support because what's happening is this idea that everyone needs to be taught the same thing. It means that gifted students are bored. They've mastered this in 5 minutes, or they've mastered this 3 years ago. Often the teacher's attention is focused on the struggling students or the students who have a disability. So one of my other areas of research is teacher attitudes toward gifted students and gifted education. And I'm actually doing a keynote presentation on this at the World Gifted Conference in Portugal in a month's time. There's opposition. Number one, I think the big reason is, apart from the egalitarian ethos, the egalitarianism in Australian society, it's number two, it's a lack of knowledge, lack of information. So there's no, in the teacher training program, in the Bachelor of Teaching, the Master of Teaching programs that students need to do to become a teacher, there's no mandate for teachers to get any training in gifted education. Whereas in New South Wales, at least, since the 1990s, all universities training teachers, they have to have a unit in special education, which is dealing with students with disabilities. So there's that inequity. So I've done research studies which demonstrate that once teachers get training, once teachers get the information, the knowledge about gifted education, why it's important, etc., their attitudes change. Thing is, the relevant authorities that are dictating what is included in the pre-service teacher training programs, they're not mandating gifted education. So this means that most teachers go into the profession with no knowledge about gifted education. They have no training. So that means that they're relying on stereotypes, common stereotypes perpetuated by the media, etc., about gifted students. They just don't know what to do with them, or they feel that, well, we need to prioritize the struggling students, or this perception that gifted students, they're privileged anyway. They were born this way. So they can look after themselves. They don't need any support. But research shows that gifted students, about half, or up to half of all gifted students, are substantially underachieving, just below their potential, substantially below their potential. So you have gifted students who get A's in their tests, but they're underachieving because that's not at the level that they are capable of achieving.
And also, therefore, not the recognition of what boredom does to one's psyche, the social isolation, and what that experience is like of not belonging, and not necessarily due to bullying or anything, just because you're different. And that the same could be said for those who are, in the other side, who are highly underachieving. There's great isolation there as well, and there can be great, loneliness and struggle, but to appreciate that just because you're doing well academically doesn't mean that you're not human and that you don't experience these other, social, emotional, and psychological,
Needs.
sufferings, challenges, and
Yes. Yes.
kids. I mean, this would have to be a common one, and please correct me, but I can imagine gifted kids playing up, behaviorally and whatever it might be when they're absolutely bored. They're
Yes.
kind of
That
going, why am
happens.
I spending an hour in this class? I already know it. I actually
Exactly.
don't even need to be taught. I'm just being told the same knowledge that I already know.
Yes. So this is quite a common response. And so teachers think, well, this gifted kid is a problem child. This is a typical response. And I've even heard stories of, because this kid is acting up so often, I'm going to retain this student in this year. This student is not going up to a higher grade level. I've even heard stories like that. So, and all of this stems from ignorance, I feel. Ignorance, lack of information, lack of training. So one thing that we could do to sort of address all of this is to mandate gifted education as a compulsory unit in teacher training programs. This isn't happening. We need this to happen. We need to change the mindset that um, all students need to receive the same education. We need to change that mindset to all students should be receiving an education that is appropriate to their abilities and potential. But it's quite logical, but it's
Well,
not happening.
and we already apply it to so many other things. As you say, with sports, there are how many levels of sport? Yes, they're all, under 11, basketball, but we don't put them all into one and train them all together. We train them with their peers who are also talented at that same level.
Yes, yes.
Now, I do understand the objection of your going out and putting more resources into that highest end. And it might appear to be that. I don't see it in the same way. I think what you're doing is you're nurturing, as you say, I think the correct word is the appropriate level
Yes,
for their ability. And so it might
yes,
appear to be more because, you're doing mathematics that most adults can't do. And so it appears as though that's the truth, but it just means you need another teacher who is a specialist at mathematics to teach these kids, not an average teacher or parent like myself that, I currently look at some of the things that my children are doing, and I've got to kind of jog my memory and go, how do you do this again? And I actually query them. How do you do it? How's the school taught you to do it? Because I'm kind of confused. I'm going to have to chat GPT this in a minute. But I
yeah,
like the
yeah,
idea of mandating that training to at least close the gap of um, uh, not being aware of the importance of that naiveness, and that's just systemic, right? This can be done at a university level. This can be done at a professional development level through schools. It just needs leadership to say this is an important agenda item.
And you'd be interested to know that in New South Wales, the Education Minister, Prue Carr, she said she said last year that she's aiming for gifted students to be catered to in every public school in the state. So New South Wales is a little more advanced in this area than other states. So, for example, in Victoria and Queensland, there is no gifted education policy in the public system, whereas every other state and territory there is a gifted education policy. And I guess New South Wales is ahead of the other states in not only the policy, but also in the fact that we've got about 50 gifted high schools. They're called selective schools in New South Wales. And also even at the primary school level, we've got 80 odd, they're called opportunity classes. So schools with gifted classes, special classes for gifted students. and also in New South Wales to cater to rural students who are disadvantaged in terms of access to resources. We've got an online school called Aurora College to cater to gifted students in rural areas. And the criteria for entry into these schools is the same as for the other selective schools in the state. So I urge the other states and territories to follow New South Wales as an example. Having said that, I think New South Wales could go much further. For example, in mandating teachers to have training in gifted education.
Just so we can address any myths that might, pop up.
Yeah.
What do selective schools look like? So if I were to walk into one of these one of the
Selective
New
schools,
South
yes.
Wales, selective schools,
What is it? How this is different?
Because I immediately, in our brain, my biases say if kids are gifted, then everything is silver plates and these big schools, glass everywhere, like that, because that's this absurd immediate response, right? Like it goes out and says they are getting the best, right? This is caviar versus an intellectually stimulating space. But hence why I'm asking the question: what does
What does it look? What does it look like?
Your regular, most common selective school
Look like?
So
Okay,
that
so
don't get in the way.
So they look exactly the same as the mixed ability classrooms, the regular schools, the comprehensive schools, just that the students are different. They don't get additional special resources. It's just they get the same facilities, they get the same type of buildings. It's not really any different. Even the teachers. So like the professional development, there's obviously a focus on gifted education at these schools, but even the teachers at the moment, there's no requirement for teachers to have had training in gifted education before they enter the school. So this is something else that the New South Wales Department of Education could improve. But yeah, they don't get special resources. It's basically, so remember, these are public schools. So the parents are not paying extra fees. They are public schools. So they get the same type of same type of facilities. Obviously the atmosphere, the culture of the school will be very different. It's a very it will tend to be a very achievement focused culture and yeah it's they don't get extra resources. That's the bottom line. I know some selective schools will sort of create funding schemes for parents to volunteer to make payments for say buildings, etc., but they don't get extra resources.
And is it right to make an assumption the reason why the teachers don't have to be special teachers is because when the culture is we're nurturing children's ability and you've got let me just pick a year group. You've got year 4 students. You're teaching at a year 6 level, for example, and that doesn't need to be confused or odd or strange. You're just teaching to it's almost like every class is an opportunity class. It's
yes,
you can learn at this level, and your peers can also learn at that level because you're with your tribe. And so a year 4, by name might still be learning somewhere between, I don't know, year 5 and year 7 or something or other. So that it doesn't mean that you've got this massive spread. You've got a shorter spread that's obviously on the higher side. Is that basically it? So you don't need these professors going in and teaching math, science, whatever it might be.
You don't need to be a professor. You don't need a PhD to teach at these schools. In my opinion, it's more about knowing about gifted education, about the teaching strategies that gifted students respond to. It's more about the sort of identifying who the gifted students are, what are the signs of giftedness, this sort of thing. It's more about understanding who gifted students are and how they respond to things. And as I said earlier, so there's no mandate in New South Wales for teachers to have training in gifted education before they enter the schools, but a lot of these schools will focus their professional development on gifted education.
What are some of the if maybe two questions coming out of that? One is identifying, as you mentioned, identifying, and how that comes about. And the second one is what are some of those teaching strategies or theories around that guide
Okay.
curriculum?
Yep. Very, very valid question. So in terms of identification, I advocate a multiple criteria approach to identification. So the identification process will be tied to what giftedness is. So I guess we need to go back to what giftedness is.
Sure.
So in Australia, giftedness is defined as high ability, possession of ability in any domain. It can be intellectual, it can be creative, it can be social, it can be physical. Possession of ability in any domain that puts you in the top 10% among your age group. So that's what giftedness is. So like there's a lot of focus on intellect. When we think about gifted education, there's a lot of focus on intellectual giftedness, but we also need to look at things like, so I've talked about physical giftedness, but also creative giftedness in the creative domain. Just because you're gifted intellectual doesn't mean you're necessarily gifted creatively or vice versa. And also there's no real attention to social giftedness either. So for example, leadership capacity, etc. This sort of tends to be neglected as well. Anyway, so that's the definition of giftedness. How we should be identifying giftedness, and if I use the example of intellectual or academic giftedness, it's basically ability tests. So things like IQ tests, like the WISC, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, or the Stanford Binet. The WISC is more common in Australia. That's one approach, but doing that requires you to go to a registered psychologist, and getting this test done is very expensive. And then there's like so teachers cannot administer these IQ tests. And then there are IQ tests that teachers can administer, like what's called the COGAT, the Cognitive Abilities Test. Teachers can administer these tests. There's a whole range of these tests. Also, we can use achievement tests as a proxy for giftedness. NAPLAN is often used to assess giftedness, but really NAPLAN is to me, it's more of an achievement test than an ability test. It doesn't give you a perfect indication, but it is nevertheless available. So every school has that data. Every Australian child needs to sit the NAPLAN test. So this is a freely available set of information. And then we need to acknowledge that different gifted students from different backgrounds have different sort of perform differently in different tests. So, for example, those students from non-English speaking backgrounds, they're a little disadvantaged in these tests. So you've got what are called non-verbal ability tests. So you've got these are tests that don't require any language. That don't use language at all. So, for example, we've got the Raven's progressive matrices or the Naglieri non-verbal ability test. And then there are some students who don't perform well in tests generally. So it might be for a variety of reasons. And so I recommend that we complement these tests with non-test data. So observations of students, teachers who have training in gifted education, nominating students who demonstrate gifted characteristics, this sort of thing. So that's how we can identify gifted students. And obviously, to identify gifted students, teachers need training in gifted education, because if they don't have training, like for example, teacher nominations, they're going to rely on their stereotypes, and their nominations won't be very meaningful. So that's nominations. If you're at a selective school, there's a test that's done in year 6 to determine who gets into selective schools. And that test comprises a mix of ability and achievement tests.
And that's
So
great
that's
because it's very much psychologically minded in terms of it's really a battery of tests,
battery of
both
instruments.
psychometrically, but observationally, whether it's within a test or a test atmosphere or outside of that. It relies on several observers, not just one.
Yes.
And the like, so that we're really trying to find those individuals who because we're trying to identify the ability, not just achievement, because you can go out and achieve higher than your ability, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't be supported. But when we're looking at this high ability individuals, that's what we're focusing on predominantly. Obviously correlates strongly with achievement usually, but we see this also in school refusal and all that sort of stuff is where you actually immediately see that there is, low motivation, very low on the motivational scale, and that really accounts for all their achievement rather than their ability, so it's trying to understand those nuances.
And one of the reasons we focus on ability rather than achievement is because there are many gifted individuals who don't achieve at their level of ability.
Yes.
Okay. So a lot of, like, some teachers will say, we don't have any gifted kids at this school because their test performance is rock bottom. And that statement is false. What you do have are gifted students who are substantially underachieving, who are not achieving to their potential. And by the way, like this, supporting students to achieve to their potential, this cuts across all student groups, all teachers. This should be one of the fundamental aims of all teachers, to support students to achieve to their full potential. It just so happens that with gifted students, that potential is so much higher than the rest of the student body. Can you remind me what the second part of your question was after identification? I've forgotten.
The second part was, I've got.
I was eager to answer the second part of the question as well. Your first part was identification, and the second part was
While we both think about it, can you go through, and I'll rack my brain, but are there, you mentioned NAPLAN as one of the, potential proxies for screening. Are there any commonplace screeners that schools do use that every student goes through, whether it's the lesser ability or that higher ability that's currently in use, while I think of the other question?
So NAPLAN is the one that's sort of freely, readily available to all schools, because all students simply sit that NAPLAN test. And then some schools will use the in-school assessments, the tests that they use for just their regular tests. That's not a good idea because it's focusing on achievement rather than ability. You're going to miss out on these underachievers. A test that I do recommend is the COGAT, the Cognitive Abilities Test, because it is relatively inexpensive. You do need to buy it. It's relatively inexpensive, but teachers can administer it to the entire school.
Okay.
And by the way, there's a term that we use in gifted education to refer to this issue of giving all students an opportunity to sit the test. It's called universal screening. One of the issues with sort of not having everyone sit a test or not having everyone access gifted education is that certain students are just, they might be highly able, but they're just not tested. So we because of teacher perceptions, which are based on stereotypes often, Many students from low socioeconomic status backgrounds, their families are not interested in this sort of thing. They're not even aware of this sort of thing. So they're not sort of advocating for their child to be tested at all. Because teachers don't have training in gifted education, they don't know that they're not working, that they don't know who the gifted students are, who are not the gifted students. And they might say, okay, I think you might be gifted, so I'm going to give you the test knowledge. This is structurally disadvantaging large numbers of gifted students. They're not being given the chance to be identified, which is a huge waste. So it's a waste for the student. It's obviously the student's not being allowed to fulfill his or her potential. The school's teacher's wasting his or her time because the teacher's instructing the student in the wrong way or with the wrong content. And society at large will be disadvantaged later on when that highly able student is unable to achieve to his or her potential in his or her career.
Yeah, yeah. It's very sad. It's very sad. The other question I did remember it was around exploring teaching strategies.
Teaching strategies. Okay. Yes. Okay. So we need to be mindful that gifted students learn very quickly. We need to be mindful that they're bored with repetition. We need to be mindful that they need to be given an opportunity to demonstrate their abilities. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I can tell you, and this is research-based, that there is substantial repetition in our school curriculum. So what we learn in year 7, we learn again in year 8, we learn again in year 9. And teachers will say, well, this is what the curriculum says, I need to teach it to you. But gifted students have already mastered it. So we might spend, a certain amount of content is learned in year 7. We might spend about 30% of year 8 just revising that. There was a study done by a French-Canadian scholar. He did a content analysis of a series of textbooks for high school students. And he found that about over half the content in this series of textbooks was repeated in the next year. So we have substantial repetition of content. This is reflected in the curriculum. What we need to be doing is we need to be pre-testing before teachers teach a unit of work. They need to pre-test students to see how much of it they already master, they already know. Rather than just go head on into teaching this unit, we need to work out how much of this unit is redundant.
Wow.
We need to just focus on what's new to these students. And obviously some refresher is fine, but spending that much time on revising content is not appropriate. So we need to pre-test students. We need to work out what students have already mastered, what they haven't mastered. That's one thing that we need to do. We need to also, a lot of these tests, I'm not sure about you, but when you were in high school, did you ever have any tests where about 5 students in the class got 100% in?
Yeah.
So if 5 students get 100% in the test, it does not mean that all these 5 students are working at the same level, number one. It means that these students the test was way too easy because like these students will get the 100% and they'll think, okay, I've mastered everything. And a lot of gifted students will say, well, that test was far too easy. I was not tested on A, B, C, D, and E, on which I'm also very knowledgeable about. So another teaching strategy is to work out what the levels of abilities of these students are and to create tests that allow these students to fully demonstrate their abilities. I'll tell you a story about my year 9 teacher. My year 9 maths teacher, he had training in gifted education, so he knew all about this. And he said, this was in year 9, he gave our class a series of tests over a period of 1 month. And he said, this isn't accessible. I'm just using this test to see where you're at so as to inform my teaching. And the first couple of tests, everyone in the class got over 80%. And it was in the last two where there was some differentiation. And at the end of this test, of the series of tests, he said, okay, year 9, these tests were year 10 tests that you got.
Wow.
I just wanted to see how much of the next year's content you had already mastered. It's obvious that you had mastered so much, number one. Number two, you know how at the end of the year, prizes are awarded for different subjects, first in English, first in maths, etc. But the teacher said, I'm sick of having to give prizes to students who were taught by half a mark. That's not an accurate assessment. That's not a fair way of working out who did the best in the subject. So yeah, this was a really clear demonstration of all the repetition that happens, and yeah, some other teaching strategies. We need to make we need to allow a lot more independent learning, a lot more learning where the student directs a lot of more choice in learning. Also, we need to offer things like grade skipping a lot more. It happens quite rarely. It does happen, but it happens very rarely because some year 8 students, they're actually working at year 12 level. They're capable of doing year 12 exams. And yet, like, how would you feel if you're a year 8 student? You're stuck in year 8. You're doing content that you mastered 4 years ago. You'd be bored out of your brains. You might be acting up. You might tell your parents, okay, I'm finished with school. I don't want to go to school anymore. This sort of thing can happen.
What a tragedy as well, right? If we just pull back and not go out and compare, this group versus that group, and we just look at these individual bases, that is like a prison. You are
Yes.
put into a prison to stare at a wall, and you're confined there for 4 years.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, much longer than 4 years. You're confined there through your whole education. And so you're asked to put up with repetition over and over and over again. Don't get me wrong, repetition is wonderful for a huge cohort of students, as we know with cognitive load theory and so on and so forth. However, for this group of individuals, or if we take specific individuals, that would be, and maybe I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but the word that comes to mind is torture, because of the chronicity of it. This is a chronic condition of boredom that can be healthy for any student. Like if we said, let's take a child of regular ability and teach them 2 years down. Yes, they'll have a nice little moment of, I got 100%, that was exciting. And then the next lesson, they will be bored ongoingly. That's the effective jail that at least comes to mind for me.
Yes. It's a waste. It's how wasteful. Like you should be learning things that are new rather than relearning things that you've already mastered.
And what's surprising is this is ongoing. This isn't the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald or Canberra Times or whatever the respective other states are publishing. This is just occurring and probably needs to be highlighted and considered, because we're all really interested in the next generation, our children, the community. These are going to be really important societal members, and I'm not suggesting others aren't. Someone who does have higher ability, who will contribute to their own respective places, whether it's science, mathematics, technology, etc. We don't want to eventually have to export them out to the Googles of the world so that they're stimulated. we want to nurture them in-house and then have schools that then can, be, recruitment grounds for really talented, innovative companies that, we do all this stuff in-house. Australia does do wonderful things, incredible things. We're absolute leaders in many areas, but we should really be nurturing that, because this isn't a short-term cycle. This is kind of like a cultural shift of saying, we want to be a nation that supports all children of all abilities.
Yes.
But
yes.
that we don't just talk about NDIS for one group and then kind of neglect the other. And don't get me wrong, yes, all of them need more resources.
Yes.
Just, because, there's always commentary that can come out of this, but this can be a missed group. This can be a missed population.
Yeah.
What would you like to see next happen in this
Gifted education?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like it if all the bodies that dictate what goes into the university pre-service teacher training programs to mandate gifted education. So in Australia, this is a state by state thing. Each state has their own body, and this is because education is largely a state issue in Australia. So in New South Wales, it's called NESA, the New South Wales Education Standards Authority. There are equivalent bodies in all the states and territories of Australia. So that's one thing that really needs to happen. Number two, so that will, if that happens, that will sort of ensure that the next generation of teachers have training in gifted education, which means that they'll know how to identify the gifted students and then to appropriately support them. Number two, we need to change. So, but for the current teachers, we need to have some mandated professional development in gifted education. We need a recognition from all the politicians, all the decision makers, that all students in Australia need an education that is appropriately pitched to their specific needs. So we need to get away from the mindset that you're in year 8, we're going to teach you everything that year 8 students are expected to get taught. We need to get away from that mindset. We need to move to the mindset of we need to be supporting students so that all of them are getting appropriate education. So I'm not restricting this to gifted students. I'm being inclusive of all students. This is what true equity is. Equity is not sameness in education. It's providing appropriate educational interventions. We also need to change this egalitarian mindset that gifted education is privilege. It's for a privileged group. Gifted students are a hugely disadvantaged group in Australia because of their lack of attention to this group, lack of attention to their educational needs, including their socio-emotional needs. We also need to be mindful that gifted students are a heterogeneous group. Different gifted students have different needs. So some gifted students have high ability across the board. Some gifted students are gifted in maths, less so in English, etc. Some gifted students are gifted socially, physically. So another thing, we need to accommodate for gifted students across all the different domains of ability, not just physical, which is happening in Australia, but also intellectual, for which there is some recognition, but also creatively gifted students, also for socially gifted students. We need to sort of acknowledge giftedness across all of these domains. Another thing is there's a perception that if you have a disability, you cannot be gifted. There are a large number of these students who are simultaneously gifted and have a disability. So, for example, they might be dyslexic, they might have ADHD or etc. So there's a term for this, and it differs in each state, but the most widely used term, these students are called twice exceptional students. These students often, the focus is on their disability rather than their giftedness. We need to we need to support both of their exceptionalities here. And on top of that, I'd really like it if there's more funding devoted to gifted education research. Um, a general community acceptance of students who have high ability. So I think we all recognize that different students have different ability levels, and I'm not saying gifted students should be valued more. No, all students need to be valued, but we need to provide all students with educational opportunities that are appropriate to their needs. And this comes with an appropriate allocation of resources, a change in mindset, active recognition of gifted education in the various policies. Yeah.
I think a very comprehensive and logical list there. In particular, to go out and roll out appropriate education for every child means funding, particularly at that ground roots level of teachers, right? We need to go out and provide teachers with the resources, whether it's training, whether it's systems that help with identifying individuals, all individuals, not just gifted, so across the board, so that we've got something reasonable, in addition to just a NAPLAN, for example, but also the time to go out and understand that on an individual case, and then some systems to go out and say the kids can be either provided with, skipping years for particular classes or whatever it might be, because it's not that the teachers can't do this, is that they're not given an opportunity, resources, or they don't even have policies that allow for it, right?
It's not their fault. It's not the teacher's fault, basically.
Yeah. For those of us who are listening, who would like to make some dent, try and move the needle, make some change, what can we do? What are your suggestions? Do we talk to our school?
Okay, so I'm also the current president of the Australian Association for the Education of the Gifted and Talented. So you could become a member of the Australian Association for the Education of the Gifted and Talented. Also, my contact details are on my website. So if you just Google me, Jae Jung, Professor Jae Jung at the University of New South Wales, you'll see my profile. I'm always interested in receiving funding. I'm always interested in doing research in gifted education. If anybody's are willing to fund my research, I'm obviously welcome to that. You can read my book on gifted students. I published a book on the career decisions of gifted students and other high ability groups in 2019. Publisher is Routledge, and you can get this on Amazon, most of the outlets, and just having a sort of a more accepting attitude toward gifted students, high ability students who will potentially be able to make huge contributions to society. That they could make a real difference. They might be the ones who cure cancer, for example. We need to support these students. Obviously, we need to support everyone, but everyone includes gifted students.
And the way to support students and individuals is to support schools, to have conversations with your schools, to talk about, those who have got the purse strings, the funding agencies, obviously our politicians, to have these types of conversations, and not in a tone that's accusatory or angry, but yes, passion will be involved. I'm a passionate person, but to go out and say, hey, there's a real need here, for all giftedness, is one of those groups. What can we do? How do we go out? Because there's a real sadness for a child to not meet their potential, whichever child that is, period. Even at a sport level, we all have regrets if we didn't go out and achieve something. That we're humans. So some great points there from you, Jay. Any final words that you would like to mention before we wrap this up? I know how busy you are, and yeah, thank you for your time as well. But anything else that you'd like to add?
That's it. I think I've I've said everything I wanted to say. Yeah.
Jay,
Thank you for having me.
look, I really appreciate your time, your message, trying to advocate for this population. We do need pioneers like yourself sticking your hand up and saying the research is here. I'm going to continue doing this, advocating, and I hope that in time that group of 50 in New South Wales can increase to meet the need of more students, but also that becomes contagious, so that Queensland, Western Australia, Canberra, where I live, ACT, Victoria, and the like, and hopefully also around the world. We're just trying to look after a population of people, and not because they are special, meaning better, but they
They're
have
different. They're
special
just
needs.
different.
They've got their own special needs. We've all got individual special needs and the difference. So why wouldn't we nurture them as well? So thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. Really appreciate you. And I imagine as well there's a body of people behind you as well who are passionate
Of course.
about this. So, my gratitude goes out to all of them as well.
Thank you, Nesh.